So, welcome you all. In last lecture, we have discussed the third unit in environmental botany. Uh, in environmental botany, we have discussed the different aspects regarding the environmental issue. So, today we start the fourth or last unit in this paper, that is on palynology. So, palynology, that means the study of the pollen grains and its different aspects. So, first of all, this in the palynology unit, the first point it is the structure of pollen grains. So, let's see the structures of. So, in general, the pollen, which is made up by the two layers, outer layer which is exine and inner layer it is intine. Then there is the at center there is the tube cells and generative cells are there. Generative cells are larger in size and tube cells are in smaller size, and they are having the tube nucleus. So let discuss the more about the pollen morphology. So first of all, the palynology, it is the study or the analysis of the spores and the pollen grains. That is known as palynology. And palynogram, that is, it is the one of the best aspect of pollen study. Then palynogram, it is the diagrammatic representations of the pollen grain. So with respect to the different aspects like polarity, then symmetry, shape, size, then its aperture, exant stratification, and exant excretions. So these are the different aspects. According to that aspects, the pollen or diagrammatic representations of the pollen grains are made. So these diagrammatic representations of the pollen grain is known as the palynogram. So or in the palynology, the palynogram, it is very important in that sense. The different aspects of the pollen grains, different aspects of the pollen grains are studied. Then the first point in that there is the polarity. So what is mean by polarity? Polarity are the sense it is the axis or the are the produced in pollen grains in or they can differentiate the pollen grain into the four tetrads by its pollen mother cells. So this is the in pollen. This is the normal structure of pollen grain. In that there is the one is the proximal end and one is the distal end. Distal end it is at the center and one is the postal end. Then these polar axis of these pollen grains it like the imaginary line. So these lines that will be passing to the center of the spore to the centers of the tetrad. So it is the like the axis of these pollen grains. But in case of the some spheroidal and oblong pollen grains, these polar regions cannot be distinguished. In that sense, these pollen grains are called as apolar. So these polar regions, they will be distinguishing pollens into the two different or three different parts. In apolar, in that sense, the pollen grains are not distinguished. Then second point, it is regarding the symmetry. In symmetry, the pollen grains are the symmetrical or some are asymmetrical. So symmetrical pollen grains are again differentiated into two types. One is the radial symmetrical pollen grains and second one is the bilateral pollen grains. So radial में these pollen grains they can differentiated into the two vertical planes of the symmetry, and in bilateral in that there is the one or two vertical planes of the symmetry. So according to the verticals or the planes that makes the two or they make the different types of this symmetric. So in that one is the radial symmetry and another one is the bilateral. Bilateral में two one or two वहाँ पे vertical planes आप कर सकते हो. Radial में सिंगल प्लेन होगा वहाँ पे और उससे टू जो भी पोलन ग्रेन है वो टू पार्ट्स में वहाँ पे डिवाइड हो जाएगा. Then third one is the size. So size of this pollen grain is based on this pollen axis. So very small pollen grains have size is about 10 mm, and medium size pollen grains or small pollen grains they are in between the 10 to 50 mm. Then medium size pollen grains are 15 to 50 mu. Then large size pollen grains are 15 to 100 mu. Then the very large pollen grains they are 100 to 200 mu. Then some are the giant pollen grains. Giant pollen grains are in more larger in size and they are about the size is 200 mu. So according to the size, these pollen grains are differentiated into different categories from small or very small, then small, medium, very large and giant pollen grains. Then fourth point, according to the pollen morphology, there is the aperture. Aperture in the sense it is the opening that are present on the pollen grains. Or according to the aperture, these pollen grains are differentiated or they are differentiated into the three types. That is pore, carpet and sulcate. तो pore that means इसमें small hole like structure pollen grain के ऊपर हमें दिखेगा that is pore aperture. Then in sulcate there is the only single cylindrical or some oval openings are present on the pollen grain. Then in the carpet type or carpet aperture, that means on the pollen grain there is the three different zones of this carpet or triangular pores are seen from the outer layer of the pollen grains. So here, according to the pore that was present on the pollen grains, these are differentiated into the three different types: pores, carpet, and sulcate. Then fifth point regarding the pollen morphology, it is the exine stratification. Exine stratification in that each pollen grains has outer sporoderm and enclosing this sporoderm enclosing the tube cells and generative cells. So this sporoderm is made up of the thick exine layer and thin intine layer. So according to the Erdmann, it is the scientists, they studied the pollen stratification in different pollen grains. They showed that these pollen grains have or they has made up by the two walls. The outer wall, it is the thick wall, which is called as exine wall, and inner, it is the thin wall, which is called as intine. So here, the exine is made up of the outer. So this exine layer, that means the outer layer, which is again differentiated into two layers. That is, in that outer one is the sexine, and inner one is the nexine. Again, the sexine, it is made up by the outer ectosexine and inner endosexine. फिगर में आप देख सकते हो. It is overall the exine layer. Then exine layer, it is again differentiated into two layers, sexine layer and nexine layer. Sexine layer is again differentiated into two parts. That is, one is the ectosexine, which is present at the outer side, and at the inner side there is the endosexine. Then nexine layer, it is present at the inner side, and this nexine layer, it is again differentiated into three layers, that is nexine 1, nexine 2 and nexine 3. In that outer one, it is the nexine 1, then middle it is nexine 2, and at the inner there is the nexine 3. Then in after the exine at the innermost layer, it is the intine layer. So this exine layer, it is thick layer and it is made up by the sexine and nexine layer. So this is about the exine stratification. Then next one is about the shape. So shape of the pollen grains. These pollen grains are found in many different shapes. In that, some pollen grains, they are spheroidal, which is spherical in shape. Some pollen grains are in oblong. Some are in triangular in shape. So, in nature, in environment, different size of the shapes of the pollen grains are present. Then, next point, that is the exine excretions. So, exine excretions, that means the outgrowth which are arising from the exine layer. जो आउटर लेयर है पोलन ग्रेन की, जो आउटग्रोथ है पोलन ग्रेन की आउटर लेयर पे, दैट इज नोन एज एक्साइन excretions. So in exine excretions, they are again differentiated into different types according to the its size. First one, it is the spiny excretions. In spiny excretion, there is the long, prominent spines-like structures arising from the exine, and certain times these spines are bulbous at the base. फिगर में आप देख सकते हो spiny appearance. If the spiny appearance are shown on the outer layer of this exine, is called as spiny excretion. Then second one is the spinulate excretion. Spinulate, it is very short, numerous small spines-like structure are present on the exine layer. यहाँ पे हमें एकदम छोटे छोटे स्पाइंस, नंबर ऑफ छोटे छोटे स्पाइंस यहाँ पे हमें नजर आएंगे, तब वहाँ पे हम बोलेंगे स्पाइनुलेट एक्सक्रीशन. देन थर्ड वन इज द क्लैवेट एक्सक्रीशन. क्लैवेट एक्सक्रीशंस में that are small arrowhead like outgrowths are present. जो स्मॉल फिगर में आप देख सकते हो एरो लाइक स्ट्रक्चर यदि आउटर लेयर पे दिखता है, दैट टाइम विच इज क्लैवेट excretions. Then baculate excretions. In baculate, there is the lanceolate outgrowth are present on the exine layer. जो lanceolate like structure हमें outer layer पे दिखेगा, that is baculate excretions. Then granulate excretions. Granulate, small granule like outgrowth हमें outer layer पे दिखेगी, that is granulate excretions. Then verulate excretions. Verulate, that means long granular outgrowth are present on the outer layer. Then reticulate excretions. In reticulate excretion, there is the outgrowth from the reticulum along the root on exine. जो यहाँ पे रेटिकुलम लेयर, आउटर लेयर रेटिकुलम है. From reticulum there is outgrowth is emerge out. That time it is called as reticulate excretions. Then gamete excretions. In gamete, the outgrowth that will look like the gamma cup. जो gamma cup, where it is present, anybody knows? Are you heard about gamma cup or Jimma cup? Are you heard?
No, ma'am.
Okay. So these gamma cup, these are present on the bryophytic plants. Bryophyte plant में present रहते हैं और it is a cup like structure रहता है. Vegetatively through gamma cup vegetatively propagation होता है. तो एक कप यदि प्लांट से सेपरेट होता है तो उससे एंटायर प्लांट फिर तैयार होता है. तो वेजिटेटिव प्रोपोगेशन का एक गेमा कप काम करते हैं. ब्रायोफाइट में आप देखोगे कि बहुत सारे ऐसे ब्रायोफाइटिक प्लांट के जिसके ऊपर एक गेमा कप प्रेजेंट रहते. तो यहाँ पे दिस आउटग्रोथ इट इज लुक लाइक द कप लाइक स्ट्रक्चर. सो it is called as gamete excretions. Then murate excretions. In murate, the outgrowth are forming like the ridges and furrows along the exine apertures. ridges और furrows like structure, एक लाइन ऊपर रहेगी एक लाइन नीचे रहेगी. ऐसे आपको जो यदि आउटर लेयर पे outgrowth दिखेगी, that time it called as murate excretions. Then perforated excretion. Numerous, there is the spores or perforations are present along the exine layer at that time, which is called as perforated excretion. Small hole are present on the exine layer at that time, which called as perforated excretion. So these are the different types of excretions which are present on the outer layer of this exine layer. So this is about the pollen morphology. In pollen morphology, we have discussed the uh, different points. Like first one, in that there is the polarity, and according to the polarity, the pollen are differentiated into the polar or apolar pollen grains. Polar, that means they are having the line or imaginary line from center to the tetrads. जहाँ पे tetrads बनते थे वहाँ तक जो line जाती है, that is the polarity. Then जो स्पिरोइडल और एब्लॉन्ग पोलन ग्रेन्स है, इन दैट जहाँ पे हमें पोलर लाइन नहीं दिखते, विच इज कॉल्ड एज अपोलर. देन इन केस ऑफ द सिमेट्री which is in case of the pollen grains, it differentiated into symmetrical or asymmetrical. Again, these symmetrical, that means they are having the similar portions of the pollen grains. This symmetrical is differentiated into two types, radial symmetrical and bilateral. Radial में हमें two ही parts वहाँ पे नजर आएंगे. Bilateral में हमें one और two वहाँ पे vertical planes एक ही size में नजर आएंगे. Then third point is regarding the size. According to the size, the pollen grains are differentiated from 10 μm up to the 200 μm. Then aperture, according to the aperture, these pollen grains are three types: pore, palpate, and sulcate. Pore, that means single pore is present on their pollen grains. In sulcate, some oval or cylindrical pore is present on pollen grains. Then in palpate, there is the three zones of this aperture or three openings are present on this pollen grain. Exine stratification, that means it is related to the layers of this enzyme. So enzyme, which is outer layer and it is thick layer, the scientists Erdmann, they are differentiated this enzyme layer. So this enzyme layer, it is again differentiated into two layers. Outer one is the sexine and inner layer is the nexine layer. Then this sexine layer, it is again differentiated into two parts. In that outer one, it's the ectosexine, and inner one is the endosexine. Then uh, inner layer of this exine is the nexine. So this nexine layer is again differentiated into three parts. Outer one is the nexine 1, middle layer is the nexine 2, and inner layer is the nexine 3. And at the inner sides of this nexine, the thin entire layer is present. According to the shapes, the pollen grains they are found in spherical, oblong, or sometimes triangular in shape. And in excretions, they are having excretion that means the outgrowth which are present on the pollen grains. So, according to the shape of these excretions, they are differentiated. First one is the spiny excretions, then spinolate excretion, clavate excreशन में हमें एरो हेड लाइक स्ट्रक्चर दिखेगा उसके ऊपर बैकुलेट एक्सक्रीशन में इलोंगेटेड और लैंसियोलेट आउटग्रोथ दिखेगी ग्रैनुलेट एक्सक्रीशंस में वहां पे स्मॉल ग्रैनुलर स्ट्रक्चर्स डेवलप हो जाएंगे वेरुलेट में लॉन्ग ग्रैनुलर आउटग्रोथ वहां पे दिखेगी रेटिकुलेट एक्सक्रीशन में आउटग्रोथ रेटिकुलम से रेटिकुलम लाइक स्ट्रक्चर दिखेगा गैमेट एक्सक्रीशन में गेमा कप लाइक स्ट्रक्चर दिखेगा देन म्यूरेट एक्सक्रीशन में रिजेस और फोरो लाइक स्ट्रक्चर हमें एज अ आउटग्रोथ वहां पे दिखेगा परफोरेट एक्सक्रीशन में स्मॉल होल लाइक स्ट्रक्चर और न्यूमरस minute pores they are present on the outer layer of this pollen grain. So in morphology there are many aspects regarding the pollen grains we have discussed here. So all of you got this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then I can close this. You can join the